Hello, my name is Cristian Wulkop, and my team and I are going to talk about alternative energy sources. According to the Sustainable Development Goals Fund, in recent years there was an increase of 1.7 billion people that now have access to electricity. This represents a pressing problem since the reliance that we have now to fossil fuels is not sustainable, and the greenhouse gases that the burning of fossil fuel causes is causing global warming, and this causes drastic changes in our environment. The international concern for global warming has created a push towards the development of new alternative and clean energy sources. By 2011, there was already 20% of the global energy sources that were coming from these alternative and clean energy sources, such as wind energy, solar energy, and nuclear energy. However, 1 in 5 people do not have any source of electricity right now, especially in developing countries. Therefore, there needs to be a big investment into solving this energy crisis. The United Nations has established the due date for the accomplishment of the global goal number 7 of affordable and clean energy for all by 2030. And in this paper, we are going to talk about 4 different types of alternative energy sources and how we can apply them to solve the current energy crisis. Now my partner Dian is going to talk about nuclear energy.
Hi, I'm Dian, and I will talk about the nuclear power energy. I want to introduce what is nuclear energy. So the nuclear energy is released from the nucleus through the nuclear reaction, and which is accordance with Albert Einstein's mass equation, which is equation is equal to mc squared, which is E is the total energy, and m is mass, and c is the speed of light. And there are total 3 kinds of the reaction. So the first one is nuclear fission, and that is use the heavier nucleus split and release the binding energy. The second one is nuclear fusion. It uses the lighter nucleus to release the binding energy. And the last one is nuclear decay. In release energy during the spontaneous decay of the atomic nucleus. And I will talk. The next one I will talk about the function and the advantages of the nuclear power. The first one I will talk is the nuclear power has a higher power density and easy to transport and store. Compared to the fossil fuel, at the same amount of the fossil fuel, the nuclear power has a much lower volume than the fossil fuel. So for example, if the nuclear plants use 50 tons nuclear energy per year, if we use the burning coal, we need to the 5 million tons, and use nearly 7 and we need to transport nearly 700 times with 20 tons trucks every day, and also the nuclear energy is a clean energy, and they cannot to produce the pollutants. So the nuclear energy cannot to influence the environment. So last time I will talk about the advantages and risks. So the if the country want to build the nuclear plants, it has a higher investment cost. So it's only have the strong economic country can do it. The second one is if have some accident of the nuclear plants, so the radioactive materials will be released from the nuclear plants, so it can have a huge damage to the ecology and the human. The last one is the political dispute. So if the country has many nuclear plants, it maybe cause some political war. So
Thank you, Dian, for the insightful look at nuclear energy. For my part, I'm Geoff Steichen, and I'm going to briefly talk about wind energy. How wind energy works, with this diagram on the side, you can see you have your basic blades, the rotator and all that, but where all the fun stuff happens is at the generator. And at the generator, when the blades turn, with the blades turning, it creates kinetic energy, and it converts that into electricity at the generator. This process promotes renewable energy, and from that renewable energy, there is no emissions. Another couple advantages and disadvantages I'm going to talk about. One it can be used to provide energy in large areas. With these wind farms that we see all over, these can provide energy for 2 small cities even at a time, which is very beneficial. And there's no costs from creating fuel. As you see, Mother Nature is the creator of electricity, and so there's no costs from the human standpoint. Some disadvantages, it is pretty hard to set up. If you've ever seen like a semi-truck on the highway pass you, the blades are huge and it takes up a whole semi. So it definitely costs a lot for transportation, and with that size it's definitely tough to set up. Also, Mother Nature can be inconsistent with wind, and sometimes it's not going to be a consistent amount of energy that's being created from the wind turbines. And finally, it could spoil the view of local homeowners or people who own a farm. My family has experienced this firsthand. My great-grandparents had their farm, now it's my grandparents' farm, had their farm built on the edge with a few wind turbines from the city, and it lessened their home value, and obviously they're pretty upset about that. And for our plan, so I'm planning on I think for the best idea is to produce wind farms in knowingly windy locations. This would be like the Great Plains and other flat areas. I think that would be the best use for it. Right now, the leading countries using wind energy are China, and that's using 33% of all the global energy, all global wind energy is China, and the US is in second place with about 17%. Next, we're going to talk about solar energy with my good friend John. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John, and thank you, Geoff, for the introduction. So for solar energy, basically we have these panels, and we can use solar technologies such as solar thermal collectors and solar panels to collect the sun's heat and light and convert these into usable forms of energy. And these energies include heating and cooling systems, hot water, and electricity. So how solar energy works, the sunlight comes onto the solar panel in the form of photons, and these excite electrons. Then they move to one end of the solar panel, which creates a voltage. And when this voltage is created, it can be sent down a direct current pathway, which is then converted to an alternating current pathway by an inverter. And when that happens, we get electricity in facilities and buildings, but with alternate current. So buildings and facilities can use this alternate current that's generated from the solar panels. So advantages of solar energy, there's a lot of advantages. You can, when solar energy is collected onto the power grid of buildings and facilities, that can be used and it can be credited towards utility companies and can even be sold for money if you go above and beyond your required utility usage. This form of energy is also clean and renewable and doesn't produce any carbon footprint. And according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, relative to solar energy, coal contributes over 16 times the amount of carbon dioxide emissions relative to solar energy. And this can be seen here in this graph. So it's evident that solar energy is much more sustainable and produces much less of a carbon footprint than these other traditional forms of energy. And so the global strategy to use this solar energy for economically disadvantaged or impoverished countries, different microfinances or small loans can be given to them so they are able to purchase photovoltaic systems that can capture the sun's light and use this as energy. And when this happens, this can be very good for leading to healthcare and better water supply as well as education. And in 2011, a report by the International Energy Agency found that solar energy technologies such as photovoltaics, solar hot water, and concentrated solar power could provide a third of the world's energy by 2060 if politicians commit to limiting climate change. So I'll hand it over to Courtney to talk about biofuels.
Thank you very much, John. So now that we've learned about nuclear energy and wind energy and solar energy, I'm going to talk about one more type of renewable energy called biofuels. Biofuels are basically any sort of energy that can be harvested from a living thing. There are two types of biofuels, one being ethanol and the other one being biodiesel. Ethanol is normally taken from plants, and most of the time it comes from corn, and most of the time that is used in hybrid cars nowadays. It's used to blend in with the gasoline, and therefore when we burn the gasoline to go somewhere, it produces less emissions. Emissions are referring to pollutants or other things that cars and other forms of transportation release. The second kind is called biodiesel, and biodiesel is harvested from the fat cells of animals or other fats that plants may produce. The most popular kind right now is actually called algal farming, and it's made from algae. And in fact, 1 hectare of algae can produce enough lipids or fuel, in fact 136,000 liters of fuel per year. So there are many benefits to using biofuels, but one of the most important ones is sustainability. According to Kenneth S. Deffies, who is a Princeton geologist, the world production of oil peaked in 2010 and is going to keep decreasing until eventually we run out. So if you take a look at this graph, we can see at the highest point of world oil production, it was around 2010, and then it's going to keep decreasing. However, the world oil consumption has kept rising since the early 1900s and will continue to rise, which means eventually this is going to crash and we are going to run completely out of oil and other fossil fuels such as that. Biofuels, however, can be replenished after each harvest, and in fact they consume carbon dioxide or emissions every single time because that's what it takes to grow, since they are mostly plant-based. So that means that we can actually sustain ourselves whenever we're using biofuels, because in the end any sort of emissions will be consumed right back into the product. In addition, we have to consider that oil is only found on a few spots on Earth, which means that certain countries can monopolize the distribution of energy, which isn't really fair or an advantage to the countries that can't really buy that. With biofuels, however, as long as a country has the space and the resources to sustain it, it could mean a real boost to their economy, which will increase the value of their society, and overall it will benefit the environment as well. Another type of thing that I'd like to consider is contamination. So in the BP oil spill in 2010, there was over 60,000 marine birds, 25,000 marine mammals, and 6,000 sea turtles that were either harmed or killed, most likely due to suffocation or due to their fish being completely killed or their food source. In addition, it also harms the area's economy by hurting their tourism industry. So the Gulf of Mexico experienced extreme economic loss after the oil spill. When you compare that to biofuels, because they are 100% biodegradable as they are made from actual biological molecules, microbes and bacteria in the soil are actually able to break it down if a spill were to happen, and therefore there would be little to no economic or environmental impact that would occur. Finally, I'd like to discuss pollution. The U.S. Energy Administration reports that 143 billion pounds of gasoline were used in 2017 alone, and each gallon of gas burns 24 pounds of CO2, which is a lot of pollution going into our atmosphere. So if we take a look at this graph right here, we can actually see how much when we burn gasoline is produced into emissions depending on the fuel source. So if we look right here, we can see that coal, when coal is the actual source in the gasoline, 83% of it is burned into pollutants and things that are going to go into our atmosphere. Where if we compare that to ethanol cellulosic gases, which would be produced from the algae, it's actually negative 88%, which means that the algae would consume more CO2 than it would cost to burn it. So when done correct, biofuel farming can actually consume at, even more than CO2 than it produces through the burning. Although biofuels do sound like the perfect fossil fuel alternative, they do have some challenges. One of those would be land scarcity. So if, let's say, a country would like to do some biofarming, however, most of their space is already allocated to industry or farming. In this case, they would not have any places to put the biofuel farms. In addition, that might encourage some countries to knock down some of the natural lands that they have around it, which would decrease habitats and decrease biodiversity, which is ultimately a bad thing. Another thing would be that these biofuel farms are all relatively new, so most of the materials would cost a lot of money, and there's not a lot in circulation right now. So it would take some time to go out and get those and establish those in different countries across the world. In addition, because biofuels are all harvested from living things, they are subject to things like bacteria, fungi, and pests. So if any sort of infection were to go on, that could seriously impact the amount of energy being produced. So overall, this converting to biofuels would cost a lot of time and money. However, ethanol and biofuel are pioneering the shift from fossil fuels, and they are all over leading to a greener and healthier Earth. So I'm going to pass you back to Cristian to sum things up.
Renewable energy sources are the solution to the global energy crisis. As we've seen, there are many types of different renewable energy sources, and these sources fit mostly every single country in the world, depending on their resources and on their economics. We've also seen that there are many challenges with renewable sources. However, we should overcome them if we want to live in a better life. The change needs to happen where it needs it the most. According to Lindemann, out of the 1.3 billion people that live without electricity nowadays, 600 million of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. And in India alone, there are 300 million people without electricity. We urge the United Nations and the whole world to invest heavily in the renewable sources. This way we can make a big change in the life of the people that live without electricity, and we can also help the environment in a significant manner. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoy our presentation.